Glad to know you're still with us. As Nigeria navigates a pivotal moment in its oil and gas sector, a complex web of challenges and opportunities unfolds. The recent surge in petrol prices, coupled with questions about the efficiency of NNPCL, have brought the industry's shortcomings to the forefront. Now, this conversation delves into the critical issues shaping Nigeria's energy landscape. We'll examine the impact of currency fluctuations, the role of emerging refineries like Dangote's, and the broader implications for supply, pricing, and competitiveness. Chukwuemeka Osuji, partner Olaniwun Ajayi LP, will be joining me for this. But before he comes on board, I'd like to, Chukwuemeka, thank you for joining me today.
Good day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just like I said in the intro, so many things have been happening lately, and the most recent, of course, is the increase in the price of premium motor spirits. I mean, we're hearing reports of NNPC filling stations selling at over 800 naira. But of course, before I'll get your comments on all of that, I'd like us to connect with my colleague who is on the field trying to get what's happening. Bernard, good morning. If you can hear me, I'd like you to say hello so we can take it up from there. Okay. All right. I guess we'll come back to Bernard. Okay, now for you, a typical Yoruba man will say Ibola Tunjasi, which definitely means where exactly are we right now? But let me ask you, where is Nigeria in its oil and gas journey? And that's for you, Mr. Osuji.
Thank you very much. The question is simple at the same time, a bit complex. In terms of where we are in our oil and gas journey, there are two ways you could approach it. One way is to ask, are we where we ought to be? The second way you could look at it is then, practically speaking, where are we at the moment? I think the answer to the first question is quite simple. We are not where we ought to be. But then in responding to the second one, we then need to recognize that it's a journey and we are on a journey. Albeit that journey has been fraught with challenges, delays, and sometimes derailing from the path, but we are on a journey. And as it relates to, for example, the midstream sector, the refinery sector, this is a journey that Nigerians have bemoaned for several years. But at least finally, we are beginning to see at least there's a hint of light at the end of the tunnel. And that's speaking specifically as it relates to us attaining self-sufficiency in terms of refined products. So it's a journey, and we're on the part of that journey. We are not where we ought to be, but I think we are slowly but steadily making progress on that journey.
I like what you said about self-sufficiency, and I do not know if I totally agree with you that we are actually getting close to solving that. When we look at the problems really that NNPC is sort of grappling with at the moment. But before we get to that, I asked that question about where we are because we all remembered when the president promised in July 2023, between July and August 2023, that petrol prices would not increase beyond the then official price. I guess the center can no longer hold, and that's why we're saying what's happening now.
Well, first and foremost, I know that Nigerians are very disappointed at what's going on, and understandably so. The impact or the implications of these increases in fuel prices can only be imagined, right? And everybody out there in the field is feeling the impact. But I think one important context that we should put to the entire conversation around the pricing is we must recall that prior to this time, even prior to the onset of this administration, the PIA had provided for sort of deregulation of the downstream regime as it relates to PMS prices. And what that fundamentally means is that, except of course to the extent to which government intervenes either totally or minimally, which they shouldn't, given the PIA, the prices will be a reflection of various factors, including market forces, international prices of crude, and the dynamics of import and supply domestically. That means, practically speaking, yes, government might to some extent manage, and I'm using the word carefully, pricing. But it's now going to be difficult going forward for government to totally determine what the prices are likely going to be. Because as I mentioned, the prices will now be subject to a whole host of both internal and external forces, which continue to fluctuate every day. So it's going to be difficult for any one person or even the government to say this is what number the prices of PMS will rest at. It's going to be extremely difficult, at least in the short term.
So does this mean that particular promise wasn't well informed? Like, what informed it? If you're promising something, didn't you look at the books? Didn't you look at the implication? Didn't you look at all the factors combined that should, give us what the price should actually be? Well, we'll come to that now. Let's look at this. If the NNPCL was run efficiently and transparently, do you think it could stand the chance to be able to remit enough Forex to the government and also pay petrol subsidy? Because that feels like where we are right now. NNPC is saying we don't have the money, we're owing debt, and even though they call it under recovery, whatever they call it, they've been paying subsidy. Now they cannot continue, and they can't even remit, monies to the federal government because of this. I mean, what would you say about a company that ran at a loss from 1976 to 2020 or so when it turned its first profit? That doesn't look like a well-run company with its potential and what its peers are doing in other parts of the world. What are your thoughts here, really?
Thank you very much. Another very complex question. And I will approach it this way. It's important for us to remember that NNPC, as the national oil company, has two objectives, two very broad objectives. One is an objective as much as possible, as now set out of the PIA, for you to operate commercially, profitably, and efficiently. Another one is the objective for it has then what I call certain strategic national objectives. So, for example, it's supposed to act as the last resort in terms of energy security. And it's supposed to drive certain things and help the government to actualize certain policy measures in the sector, both upstream, midstream, and downstream. What often happens with most national companies is that for those examining this from afar, you then begin to see what might appear to be a conflict between those roles, because at the same time, one would say this company should operate very efficiently, but at the same time, it's managing other more strategic objectives, which might not result or translate to immediate profitability. But in terms of the yardstick, it's meeting other ends. So we need to take that into context when we are determining how NNPC is performing. As it relates to profitability, PIA was passed just a few years ago. And of course, the PIA has now set the stage for NNPC to begin to operate commercially. But at the same time, as I mentioned, it must also take into consideration other fundamental aspects. Now, as it relates to Forex and the ability of NNPC to remit sufficient revenues to the government, we are all parties to where we've been as a nation over the last several years. We are all parties to what is happening, not just locally, but internationally. For example, external pressures relating to things, for example, like access to financing, looking for cheaper sources of financing, even things as remote as the energy transition debate has near or direct implications or impact on crude production in the upstream. And we are talking of revenues that come principally from crude and gas production. So the NNPC at the moment will continue to navigate those internal and external forces. We just came out of a period of several years where we were battling with pipeline vandalization and inability to just recover production from the upstream. So it will take a while to come out of these challenges before we can then begin to talk about sustained and sustainable profitability. But I believe, as you rightly mentioned, if they continue or if they toe the path of what I call efficient and prudent management of the operations, with time we will get out of it. But this challenge is one that is being faced by quite several national oil companies, and it's not just unique to NNPC.
Well, for a lot of Nigerians, what they're interested in is the price of premium motor spirit. Now, from where we were to where we are now, what role do naira devaluation and depreciation play? And how, well, maybe not how, but do you think enough effort is being made to address that issue?
On the pricing itself, as I mentioned when I started, the pricing will be determined by various factors, the external factors that go into the pricing. You're looking at whether the petroleum products is being sourced locally or when it's been imported into the country. If it's been imported into the country, there are various factors that contribute to the price. And one of the key factors is the prices of international prices of crude, right? And then when you take that into consideration, all add-on costs, importation costs you pay at the and levies you pay at the ports, all the levies, the prices required to move from a depot in Lagos or far up north.
Mr. Osuji, I guess we'll come to that. I guess we'll come to that. I'm looking at from July 20, or let's say from May 2023 to where we are now. How much of an impact, has the Naira devaluation been on the prices, or how much impact has the Naira devaluation had on the price of PMS in Nigeria? That's one. And I also want you to look at how far-reaching do you think this current increase will be, on Nigerians?
In terms of the impacts of the Naira devaluation, what you were supposed to do was, in the long term, address certain, should I call it, imbalances within the system. It was not meant to, and it could not have had a very direct impact on the prices of PMS, because you must remember, even where we are as a nation in terms of Forex, if you look at the value of the Naira, is a function of so many things, including our production capacity as a country. So there might not be necessarily a direct linkage between the Naira devaluation and the prices of PMS. But yes, there's a linkage to the extent to which, of course, people are sourcing for these products outside the shores of this country, and some of the inputs required to produce or to import are benchmarked to the dollars. Once the Naira is devalued to some extent, that means that it's going to be a greater task for people who are importing to be able to get to the right prices they are looking at. In terms of where we think we'll be in pricing, where we are at the moment is a state of flux. We are not nearly at the point where prices will settle. I think we'll have to go through this stage for some time. Production will have to increase, supply will have to increase before we can then begin to have a conversation on the prices, settling. At the moment, we can't expect the prices to settle at the moment, realistically speaking.
Okay, so Mr. Osuji, I'd like to have you hold your thoughts while we have my colleague who's on the field. He will join us to tell us what's happening right there. All right, we're still talking about NNPC, Nigeria's oil and gas sector, and of course, Dangote Refinery. Chukwuemeka Osuji, thank you for standing by.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so isn't it a bit inauspicious that the rise in the price of PMS is coming on the day Dangote Refinery announced the commencement of petrol production?
Well, I like the way you use the word inauspicious. And the question is there a linkage between both? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes it's difficult to speak to what is happening at the level of either policy making or out there in the field. But I think, yes, the coincidence it's something that is certainly noteworthy, that it's coming at the time at which Dangote has announced that it's ready to start, shedding out products.
All right, so talk to me. What is the implication of the coming on stream of this refinery on PMS pricing, supply, and distribution in the country? That's like 3 in 1. So we'll take it one before the other.
It's all right. I think I'll start with supply.
Okay.
And again, I usually like to put things within the proper context. And the context that in starting this session, you asked me, are we where we should be? Where were we a couple of years ago? We were at a stage where Nigerians have been lamenting over the inability of the state-owned refineries to produce enough refined products. And then a few years ago, the Dangotes of this world started. A few other modular refineries have actually started. Walt Smith Refinery has been producing for several years now, and there's a couple in the Niger Delta area. But little volumes for the modular refineries. But the Dangote was signposted as one of the key refineries that will accelerate and catapult our refining capacity. So thankfully, it's come on stream. For me, it's a celebration. We will get to pricing. The fact that that refinery is on board, and we are not just looking at PMS. People tend to focus only on PMS. The production from that refinery has a multiplier effect on various aspects of the economy, petrochemicals, heavy fuel oils, all sorts. A massive ecosystem will be built on the back of that refinery. And that's a win, not for Dangote, but for the country and for ordinary Nigerians. And if we do things the proper way, that refinery will ensure that at least within the medium to long term, we will attain sufficiency in supply. Not just in Nigeria, but we should be able to export to other parts of Africa. Now, as it relates to pricing, what's going on? As I mentioned to you, the prices are being determined based on a number of factors. Some of those factors will not be controlled by the refinery owners themselves. Some of those factors cannot be controlled by the government itself. All government can do is maybe to support or to subsidize, but they can't control those factors because they are external factors. So at the moment, when Dangote starts producing and ramps up production, what we will first see is increases in supply. Will there be an immediate impact on pricing? There might not be. But what we hope to see is that gradually, with the increased supply and the fact that that production is coming from in country, that will gradually begin to have a ripple effect on the pricing. And if we are lucky enough and other marketers come in and other people are lifting and distributing and the efficiencies of that distribution, we can ramp up on that, then gradually we hopefully should be able to see a bit of a decline in the prices in the medium to long term. But in the short term, it's not going to be immediate. Even if it happens now, the reduction in the prices will not be sufficient to make Nigerians happy, given where we are now and the word we've heard on the streets.
Well, it's not news that we're interested in having enough supply, but of course, we're also interested in the price. And so for some industry experts, they anticipate that Dangote will likely set its petrol price upon commencing distribution this month. And that, of course, is if it follows the similar approach it's used for announcing the diesel price and all of that. However, he has said at several interviews since yesterday that the refinery is not setting the price. Is that the ideal thing?
I think it's important to understand a bit more context around the value chain, right? The refineries will, yes, because the refineries do not often supply directly to the pumps. So the refineries will contribute to the prices at the pump, but they do not set the prices at the pump. So the Dangote Refinery, as well as other refineries, will sell as what is known as either ex-refinery price to the depots or the major marketers or NNPC in this case. On the back of that pricing, other things will be into the pricing, and then we would arrive at the pricing at which the PMS will be sold at the pump. So when he says he will not control or determine the prices at the pump, it's actually correct. It will have a significant impact at the prices of the pump, but the refinery itself will not control what that price is likely to be.
Absolutely. So what are we looking at now? I'd like you to probably run us through the cost from top to bottom, what the ideal pump price of PMS from Dangote Refinery should be, your expectations around the possible price, either for the marketers or the depots, and then the final consumers. I mean, you're in this industry, you know how it runs, you know the metrics and all of that. So looking at all the metrics, what are you looking at?
Thank you for the vote of confidence, but I'm a lawyer after all. I'm not an operator. But just to mention, from what we know, as I first mentioned, one of the key components of the pricing is the price at which, the base price at which the product itself, let's look at Dangote, for example, will be sold. And that's known as the ex-refinery price, right? But in the normal scheme of things, imagining that we were importing this product, so you would take you factor into the entire mix, the cost of the crude itself and the associated cost, shipping costs, transportation costs, freight rates. If they are going to engage in things known, for example, as light train operations, the light train cost will come into the fee, insurance fees, MPA fees, NIMASA fees. If there's going to a jetty, any jetty throughput charges, if it's going to be stored in the depot, or the storage charges, typically on the throughput basis as well, for that will all come into it. And then, of course, there will be a margin for either the wholesale sellers, depending on whether it's going straight to the pump or not. But typically, there will be a margin for the wholesale sellers. There might also be a margin for the retailers, right? And then a couple of administrative charges. It's a whole host of charges that feed into the final prices. So all these, to some extent, come into the mix, particularly if the product is being imported. For Dangote, that is, but we must remember Dangote is operating in a free trade zone, right? And a bit more dynamics. It's a bit technical. I don't want to go into details of that, but there's a bit of a dynamics around supply from the free trade zone into the country. Yes, it's in Nigeria, but it's still a free trade zone, right? And legally speaking, it's administered differently. So a good number of the charges I mentioned might not apply because it's operating from the free trade zone, but some of them are still likely to apply. So all this will impact on the prices. What the eventual price is likely to be, it's very difficult for me to say speaking from here. But just note it. It's important just to note that these.
Give us a range. Nigerians want to know. Give us a range. Yes. I mean, because we're in a situation where there is distrust between the government and the people. So it's okay if policymakers, it's okay if, people who are analysts or watchdogs in the industry sort of give us a range so we know if the government is, ripping us off or not.
No, that's the good. Let me put it this way. That's the first and foremost. It's about when we're looking at policy making and communication. That's for the government to do. But at the same time, we also need to factor in economic realities. If I were to say, and I'm in no position to say at all, So I would rather not say because I don't want to be held to a number.
Okay.
But anything around the range of between, I say, 700 to 800, possibly might be the prices we're looking at. But again, it depends.
Is that
Remember
a pump price?
Yes, I'm talking of a pump price. It also depends. It's a factor. It's a factor of combination of imported products coming in and what is coming out from the Dangote Refinery. It's not as if today Dangote has flooded the entire market with its products. It will take a while before that happens. So the prices will gradually, be in a state of flux before it will then settle over the next couple of weeks.
Right. So what's the implication of this development for depots in Nigeria, especially when other refineries also come on stream? I'm asking because if we look at what Femi Otedola was saying while congratulating his friend Aliko Dangote, he was talking about the impact this would have on depots. Talk to us about this. Is it a good time for depots?
It's a good time for a whole lot of people, not just the depots. And I also alluded to the petrochemical sector and its impact. Yes, if things are done properly, what we should begin to see is that the massive volumes, which will eventually come up from the Dangote Refinery when it ramps up production, should be available. And in terms of availability, it's not going straight anywhere. They will essentially first land at depots. So the various depot operators should expect to see increased activities and volumes coming from the back of the Dangote Refinery. But again, that depends on the commercial and other arrangements between the Dangote Refinery and other key stakeholders, for example, the government and the NNPC, in terms of the logistics and how the distribution from that refinery will be run. And we're still waiting to hear from the government definitively on what that is going to look like.
But that's quite interesting. Now, coming back to the mandates to sell crude oil to Dangote, Naira, and some other local refineries, and also supplying a specific amount to the company, there are concerns about the country's ability to earn Forex from its crude if it keeps to that agreement, going by the amount of crude oil NNPC has either pledged or owes several organizations. What do you say about that?
You recall when I started, I mentioned about strategic objectives, commercialization, and profitability. And sometimes they look like they're conflicting objectives. Yes, the law, first and foremost, let's go back to the law, has set the tone and has put in place a template that requires, if the regulators deem it so, for refineries to be supplied crude oil in Naira. And that's for so many reasons. But one of the key reasons is that that's pressure, significant pressure on our Forex that is not even available, will reduce. The pricing will be internationally determined based on other factors, but at least it will not be paid for in dollars. And that's a good thing. The fact that the government is not earning direct Forex from the sale of those crudes, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That must be sacrificed for the wider interest of the economy and of the refinery sector, so that these refinery sectors will be able to attract sustained crude supply. Because if they do not have sustained crude supply over the period, then that sector will fail.
Right. So what percent? Go ahead, please.
So I'm saying the fact that the government is channeling a portion of its crude, or even other upstream producers are channeling a portion of their crude to the refineries and they are being paid in Naira, is not a bad thing in the long term. The only important point for the upstream producers, including NNPC, is to ensure that the pricing at which is being sold to the crude is one that doesn't end up with the upstream companies being on the downside. But save for that, it's not a bad thing at all, because there are other long-term benefits to that arrangement.
Okay, before I close this conversation, I'd like to know, your general thought basically on the industry and your outlook. But before then, trading oil companies are reluctant to supply NNPC because of payment, and we hear $6 billion. Now, however, this same NNPC is expected to buy off stock from Dangote. Should we be worried?
Well, there's a whole lot going on at the moment, and there's that conversation between the trading companies you mentioned and NNPC. But if we are referring to NNPC being able to buy refined products from Dangote
without owing,
sorry,
without owing,
yes, they shouldn't. You must remember that prior to this time, there have been a whole lot of arrangements that were put in place between the NNPC and the Dangote Refinery, even on the part of the government. You must remember also, as I mentioned to you, part of the statutory mandates of NNPCL is also to operate as supplier of last resort, right? So in line with that mandate, yes, I am quite confident that the NNPC or the government should be able to meet the obligation to the Dangote Refinery if they are buying from Dangote. That Dangote Refinery was not funded from Dangote's money from his pocket. There were a whole host of financiers who lent money for the setting up of that project, and they must be paid. And I think the government understands that fundamentally. So I do not think that we're going to get into a scenario where we will begin to witness, inability to pay when we are just starting off. No, that can't happen now. We pray it shouldn't happen now, and I don't think it can happen at this time. So I think any commitments to supply refined products, either directly to the NNPC or through any other instrumentalities of the government, will be backed up by the ability to pay for the product supply. We have the market for it. We have a massive market in Nigeria and in Africa for the product. So the ability or the willingness to pay for it should not be an issue.
Right, Mr. Osuji, like I said earlier, I would like to get your outlook for the sector for the remaining days or months in the year.
It's going to be a bit volatile, and I think Nigerians should brace up. I actually sympathize with Nigerians. I'm a Nigerian myself, and everybody's feeling the impact of this. But I think I will liken this to what I call birth pangs when the lady is in labor, right? And what often happens is that with those pains and those changes, by God's grace, I'm sorry to mention God instead of this interview, we will see a new birth. And as I mentioned when I started, this refinery is something that a whole lot of Nigerians have looked forward to. This refinery has come on stream. This refinery will change, in particular, the midstream landscape and the refinery sector in Nigeria. It's not going to happen immediately. The implications as it relates to pricing, for example, and supply will not happen immediately, but with time, it would happen. Even if it doesn't totally deal with the issues, it will at the minimum mitigate some of the issues we are facing. So I think I'm optimistic as it relates to the refinery sector. And I think that in the next couple of years, we should begin to see things begin to ease off. And hopefully, Nigerians will thankfully be in a better place. Hopefully.
Thank you so much, Chukwuemeka Osuji, partner, Olaniwun Ajayi LP. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the show today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.